Right, so we are ready to start now. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this extremely contemporary session on the topic, Will DESH catalyze India's integration into global value chains, being organized by the Trade Promotion Council of India. At the outset, let me take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed panel to you. We are pleased to welcome Shri Alex Paul Menon, IAS, Joint Development Commissioner, MEPZ, Special Economic Zone. Mr. Sunil Rallan, Chairman and Managing Director, Matadee Free Trade Zone Private Limited. Mr. Sasikumar Gendham, MD, Salcomp Manufacturing India Private Limited. And Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, Professor, ICRIER and Member, Committee for Advanced Trade Research, Trade Promotion Council of India. I will now proceed to give a brief background on the topic so that everybody is literally on the same page. With the aim to catapult India to a global hub for international trade and investment, the SEZ Act 2005, supported by SEZ rules, came into effect in February 2006, with the primary objectives of generation of additional economic activity, promotion of exports of goods and services, investment from domestic and foreign sources, creation of employment opportunities, development of infrastructure facilities. SEZ units were provided various incentives, including duty-free import on a domestic procurement of goods for development, operation, and maintenance of units, 100% income tax exemption on export income for SEZ units under Section 10AA of the IT Act for the first 5 years, 50% for the next 5 years, and then 50% of the plowed back export profits for the next 5 years. The sunset clause for units was made effective from April 1, 2020. Exemption from central sales tax, service tax, and state sales tax. These were subsumed into GST, and supplies to SEZs are zero rated under IGST Act 2017. They're also exempted from other levies as imposed by respective state governments. Single window clearance for central and state level approvals. Now, how far has this act supported or improved India's exports? What figures tell us? As of June 30, 2022, India has 376 notified and 268 approved SEZs, with 5,576 units approved in these zones. Total cumulative investment in SEZs reached rupees 6,49,705 crore as of March 2022, generating employment for around 2.7 million people. Exports from SEZs were recorded at $133 billion or rupees 9.9 lakh crore in 2021-22, growing by 30% YOY, according to SEZ India. While this may be attributed to a base effect due to COVID, but when you look at the initial figure of rupees 22,840 crore in 2005-06, when the policy was first launched, it's a huge leap. However, SEZs have faced criticism for a number of reasons. We still have huge unutilized land, absence of complementary infrastructure has been cited. Far greater utilization of SEZs has been done by the services sector, in particular IT, ITES. So we've not seen that kind of pickup from manufacturing. SEZs were not allowed to do job work for DTAs. Domestic sales of SEZs were uncompetitive in the instance of FTAs. There was need for more liberal labor laws, as cited by the industry. And there was also this often comparison with China, which has arguably, of course, seen far greater success with its SEZs. There is a recognized need also to rationalize the multiple modes of economic zones that were set up over the years. We have seen a number of such zones like Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, National Investment and Manufacturing Zones, food parks, textile parks, etc. And finally, of course, under its commitments to the WTO, India was asked to discontinue the SEZ scheme, particularly due to its direct incentivization towards export performance. To cater to some of these issues, the government held detailed discussions with stakeholders and formed the Baba Kalyani Committee. The committee proposed a framework shift from export growth to economic and employment growth, with the setting up of 3 E's, or employment and economic enclaves. The committee emphasized on the importance of ensuring high-speed transport infrastructure, uninterrupted water and power supply in these zones. It proposed that enablers for SEZ should be based on factors like jobs created, investment, inclusivity, value addition, technology differentiation. It also recommended extension of MSME schemes to these zones and emphasis on import substitution for sectors like electronics. Now, coming to 2022, where post the COVID era, the government is extremely focused on improving our export performance with the, and also entering into a lot of free trade agreements, bringing in policies for improvement of our industry and focusing on competitiveness of the industry. We have recently seen that the government has drafted the DESH scheme, or the Development of Enterprise and Services Hubs, which can now be called SEZ 2.0, just to give it a context. And the scheme, of course, aims to replace the SEZ Act and make the rules governing SEZs more WTO compliant, while also attracting greater foreign investment through creation of large industrial manufacturing zones with world-class infrastructure. And the hubs aim to promote economic activity, generate employment, integrate with global supply and value chains, maintain manufacturing and export competitiveness, develop infrastructure facilities, and promote investments, including in R&D. So I would now like to come to the panel and, since this is a very hot topic of discussion today, what does the DESH scheme actually include, and what does it promise for the industry going forward at this critical juncture? We would discuss in this session prominently the key provisions in the DESH draft bill, how it compares to the previous act, expectations on how DESH will boost trade and investment and accelerate India's integration into global value chains, incentives that manufacturing and services companies can expect from DESH, and also how DESH zones will operate vis-a-vis conventional industrial zones in India. I would now like to come to my panel and start with Alex Paul Menon, sir. Sir, I would like to ask you, first of all, why was the existing bill needed, and how do you think it is an improvement over the SEZ Act 2005?
Yeah,
what do you say?
Thank you for making me part of this interesting panel. I just wanted to present some facts before I start. Under the jurisdiction of MEPZ, where we have Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, and Andaman, there's also a revelation to us, because we knew this data all along. We didn't see it in that perspective till now. And is there around 2,000 plus hectares, 4,000 plus hectares of land areas what we have under our jurisdiction in all the various SEZs. And the land utilized is only 50%. 50% of land is lying vacant. And when it comes to the overall built-up area, in terms of for the service sector, we have close to around 23.6 crore square feet of built-up area with us, out of which around 7.6 crore built-up area is lying vacant. Nationally, if you see, there are 20,000 hectares of land lying vacant within the notified SEZs, and around 10 crore square feet built-up space is lying vacant. So why is this happening? On one end, the industry is citing for land, it's citing for built-up area, and on the other side, we are having developed, partially developed land areas where the industry can just go and plug in, and also have built-up space which is lying vacant. This anomaly has happened because we actually brought a horse to India, and while bringing the horse, there was a gentleman who said he'll offer transport services to bring the horse. And after he brought the horse, he came and said, because just because I offer transport, I will not let this horse move freely. You're going to strap it to this pole, and it's going to operate only within this 10 square meter of this pole. So what we have done in the name of offering incentives to basically create the infrastructure and for continuous imports of raw material, just because I offered something duty free, we decided that we'll not let the horse go out and search for its own greener pastures. And the greener pasture may be inland, it might be outside. We decided to just lock the horse in. We decided to lock it ourselves. So that is the story of Indian SEZs. We have a horse and we aren't letting it run free to search its own pastures and grow, and and also let everything else grow along with it. So that's a sad story of the Indian SEZs. So and if you look at it, how, when we conceive this did not even have services in its scope in 2005. But if you look at the growth of service sector today, it's humongous. And it neither meets domestic needs, nor does it meet the WTO needs. We have a clause called the net foreign exchange earnings, which is detrimental to to our own domestic needs, because an industry becomes exclusively export oriented, and the moment you have to sell something at the DTA, it becomes very expensive. There are numerous stories which we have heard where a company just set up shop within India is not able to sell it locally because the same company which is set up abroad and unit abroad is selling to India because of free trade areas signed, right? From for example, from any of these Asian countries, the products that come in are cheaper than the same company just set up here, and the stuff is being exported. So some of what has happened, we have not thought about optimization of the capex that has been put in place in terms of establishing these units. Optimization of the infrastructure that we have put in place to basically create these world-class products within the country. So optimization requires, and the newer concepts of, let me say, just in time, requires that every penny spent within this country in creating infrastructure, in creating transport facilities, in creating logistics facilities, will have to be thoroughly utilized to the penny, squeeze for every penny worth of it. And to do that, we need to have a very, very flexible approach. And we need to think of larger scales and not just restrict ourselves with smaller objectives. To do that, I think, and to also get ourselves to be a part of the global value chain, to be integrated into the global value chain, we need to really think of a larger scale, better products, and greater flexibility. And to achieve that, I think the existing act had to be modified, in a big fashion, and also to relook at the existing hierarchy, wherein the Secretary of Commerce sits and approves the developers and co-developers. There's high level of centralization. The state governments are not being involved in much of the decision making. And though like you see, the IDRA Act, though it has been petered down, the licenses under the IDRA Act, licenses under the Arms Act can actually be given by the Commerce Secretary, if the unit is located within the SEZ. So in so many ways, what I would achieve, what Arms Act would achieve, the other Government of India's ministries could not achieve when it comes to SEZs. So we need to look at a zonal authority with larger decentralized powers at its disposal, which can actually get along with the state government and take very quick decisions in support of the industry, so that we actually quickly establish infrastructure and manufacturing units and logistics arrangements within the country. So I think in the light of all this, it was extremely important to create a new bill with a new thought, where there is no NFE criteria, where the movement between to and fro between the DTA and the SEZ units, it happens seamlessly, because the moment you set up a unit, I cannot tell you that a unit is going to function for 24. If it's possible to run the unit for 24 hours, and if your current export orders only mandate you to run for 8 hours, you put your machinery for waste for the next 16 hours. That is not fine. You should still be utilizing the machinery 24/7 to cater to the DTA. And wherever a unit requires any kind of subsidy, any kind of incentive for exports, they should reach out to us, and the rest can just freely do the operations just by paying taxes. That is how the approach should be, rather than putting a filter at the valve and saying everybody will go through the wall. It is needed that only those who seek incentives come through the wall, get a little scanning done, and then move out, and the rest of them do business as usual within these things. And as Baba Kalani Committee report rightly pointed out, we have a need to create the triple-Es, the economic enclaves, export enclaves, where we have infrastructure where everybody can plug in and cater to everybody around, is what we are looking at in the new Act, DESH Act. Yeah, I think that's all from my side.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your perspective on giving us a overview. I would now like to take some perspective from Mr. Sasikumar on, first of all, how Salcomp is engaged in India, the size of its business in India, and how do you view the post-COVID attractiveness of India as a manufacturing and services hub?
Yeah. First and foremost, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here in midst of all of you and to discuss the very important future prospect we have, which is DESH. I'm extremely glad to hear the comments from Mr. Alex Paul Menon. So heartening to hear, that he's spelling out all the troubles that we are facing as an industry, and I'm so glad that he has understood that. Thank you for that, sir. So with that short note, for us, we have been here in India last 15 years. Of course, we have been in SEZ predominantly from the beginning. Exporting to most of it, but then the turning point was in 2016, when manufacturing chargers supplying from an SEZ to a DTA was taxed at 20%. But then, when you supply from a DTA, there wasn't. But at the same time, when you import from a FTA zone, you pay 5%. Same product made in India attracts at 20%, but same product imported attracts only 5%. So of course, there was a big anomaly at that point, and we were forced to go out of DTA, SEZ, and move to a DTA zone. And that's how was born our Noida factory. So we have produced almost close to 1 billion chargers in this country over the last 15 years. So it's a large scale operations. And through the pandemic, of course, the pandemic was really bad, but fortunate enough, I have to say that, the governments have been very proactive, very, very supportive in making sure that our operations were successful during that period. And I have to admit that most of the new businesses that we were able to create is all during the pandemic. So, getting machineries, having them installed, getting all the products qualified, all of that happened during the pandemic. So therefore, the pandemic at least provided a great opportunity for us from business perspective. But that's mainly for exports. The challenge comes is because today we have customers who are supplying both for the export market as well as for the domestic market. And as rightly mentioned by Alex sir there, we have capacities. It's the same line. It's the same product that you need to produce both for the domestic market and the export market. But today, by law, we are forced to have two separate factories, with a big fence between each other. And investments have doubled. No need for that. The capacity utilization is not at its best. Therefore, we have shot our own foot by making ourselves not to be very competitive, with all this depreciation that we acquire. So therefore, from that point of view, we are extremely glad that this new scheme is being thought out so that we can have homogeneous, scheme where we can operate for both and just pay for what is kind of, when needed. So therefore, we have been a company with just about 3,000 people initially, but today we almost employ 10,000 employees, of whom 90% are women employees. And we also took over the Nokia facility, as you know, and the whole campus is acquired by Salcomp. And our vision is to go to 25,000 people in the next 1 year. So that is what we are envisaging. And also not just that, we have to get to be, a company of our scale. So we have to hit the $1 billion mark and go beyond that. That's when India is really talking big. And we are aiming for such a number, like 25,000 people and $1 billion to be made from this campus. Therefore, I think there's a lot of support that is needed from the government when it comes to how we seamlessly have the schemes, so that we can move between factories, SEZ to DTA, of course, with all the taxes and others being calculated and paid as it's supposed to be. But all that we expect is flexibility to be able to compete with the global arena. And, we are not just competing with China anymore. I think we're directly competing with Vietnam. That's what it is, because when things are moving out of China, they are going directly to only two countries. One is India, the other one is Vietnam. We have a very, very big prospects and very positive note that, most of the things are coming towards India as we speak in terms of electronics manufacturing. But we have to get our acts right in order to be able to capture this opportunity on hand. So let me stop here for now, and I'll come back to you for the next questions. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you for that note and talking about your constraints when it comes to investing in India as well as the huge opportunities. So, sir, how do you look at the DESH scheme and in the format which the draft has been released, and how it can promote trade and investment in India, according to you?
Yeah. See, the first thing is at least the scheme has now, taken into account most of the problems that we have been talking into, like, the difference, the physical differences between SEZs and DTAs. So that is kind of being abolished. And the more focus is about improving efficiency, utilizing capacities, and then, getting competitiveness. So we're all talking the right things when it's coming over there. And then, see the NFE, achieving the NFE, I think that was one of the biggest challenges all of us had, and we continue to have meeting those in 5-year blocks for whatsoever reason. I'm glad that that's going to be out, more or less in this thing. All we expect is a seamless transactions between SEZ and DTA. So please let this happen for the companies so that we can use the capacities as much as we can. And the second thing is most of the SEZs have, all SEZs have now been kind of notified as multi-sector. And then, but there are still a requirement of having this 50 hectares minimum requirement and this kind of category. So I think those have to be out as well, because that's not serving in any interest going forward, in DESH. And I hope that will be out as well. And the third point is utilizing the common facilities. We have to have, in electronics, it's a very, very high investment when it comes to testing and, approval points. So we need to have one facility where we can use for both SEZs and DTAs and move forward with that. Incentives are second part. I don't want to talk about any fiscal incentives or cash incentives. That's another one. But I'm talking about those basic fundamental things that we need to fix to keep the operations at the highest efficiencies possible, as we are competing with nations such as Vietnam today. While things are moving out of China, as I say that the kind of inquiries that we have today, it's not possible to handle so many inquiries. Actually, I've never seen so many in a decade. So that's the kind of inflow that is happening. I think time is also of essence. We have to get this as soon as we can. And, moving forward with ease. So I think ease of doing business is going to be the biggest ask that we have, at least. And the most important part is, how is China able to succeed this kind of massive growth is, of course, having people on, in the campus. But India is not being used to that kind of a concept. People still commute to work. But going forward, if I'm just thinking of, I have to recruit 25,000 people on campus. It's not possible to operate like 500 buses on the road. It's not physically possible. So we will have to have hostels or dormitory facilities. Again, that is one thing. Also, a kind request that I have is that it has to be, again, seamless use. Whether it's used for an SEZ operations or DTA operations, doesn't matter. Whether you put it in a DTA zone or a non-processing zone of SEZ, I think these are certain things we may have to really look at it in detail. But I would say, see, today, just about 25% of our global revenues are coming from India, but at least more than 60% of people are located in India. We are talking about the opposite. We want to have almost 70+% of our revenues to be coming out from this country. And there's a very bright possibility, and we're all working towards that. So schemes, DESH, I think is a big enabler. And I'm extremely thankful, to all the authorities who have thought about such a forward-looking policy. And also, all the industries like Mr. Sunil and many of them who have put in a lot of hours to get it there. So that's my opinion on the DESH scheme right now. Yeah.
Right, Sasikumar sir, very pertinent points, and hopefully these suggestions will be taken forward. I would now like to come to Sunil Rallan sir and ask him about the more specific pointers of the DESH scheme. Sir, how does the industry, how can it expect investment in enterprise and services hubs to be different from investing in DTA areas now, with once this new act, if and when it comes into force, And what kind of fiscal incentives are expected to be given to the companies now as opposed to export-based incentives under the previous act?
Thank you very much for this invitation on this panel discussion. I think it's a very important topic because I believe that to begin with, I must let the participants know that India is actually right now in a very sweet spot. You know, the whole business of growth into India started with the US-China trade war, and this was further accelerated by the COVID-19 situation, and it has gained further momentum with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And to be very honest with you, in the last 1 week, with the Chinese missile firing, they've really stepped on the gas to come and sort of flee towards India to make their factories and their manufacturing setups. Now, what is happening really in the world is everybody is really looking at India as the last frontier, as the last bastion where safe investments can be made into the manufacturing sector. And on the Indian side, we are sitting on a very fine line between becoming the last frontier for the global investment community and becoming a lost frontier if we don't get our act together very, very quickly. So on the finer aspects, I think Mr. Alex has highlighted some of them, and Mr. Shashi has pointed out some of these things. So the key points are, one is the NFE concept is set to go. Supplies in INR for both goods and services is in the works. Reverse job work, which means SEZ units doing work for DTA customers will be a permissible activity. And as Sashi very rightly pointed out, the capex in these testing facilities and some of the new technologies that we see coming up to support IoT and Industry 4.0. These are millions of dollars worth of investment. If you're talking at semiconductors and fab and all of these facilities, and these cannot be limited to usage by SEZ units only. These have to be used by all companies, both in the DTA as well as the SEZ. So the thought so far has been that the MSME sector in India will be adversely affected if this kind of service or facility is permitted. But I don't agree with that because there's enough empirical evidence to show that what is sought to be set up and invested in the SEZs is very high technology and capital intensive plant and machinery, capacity for which does not exist currently in India. We are not talking about sewing machines and low technology equipment being set up in these SEZs for rendering services or job work to DTA factories. It's going to be 3D printing, it's going to be testing, it's going to be a lot of these kind of activities which are not presently in India. Mr. Sashi very rightly pointed out an anomaly where it was cheaper, or even now it is actually cheaper to import many products from the ASEAN region. And now you have the India-Australia agreement on trade, the India-UAE agreement on trade, where almost 95% of the product lines can be brought into India without any tariffs. Now, the same product, when it is made in an SEZ in India, is going to be subject to tariffs. So we have been, trying to negotiate with the government, with the ministries, that like in the mover scheme, the duty foregone principle as the first step must be made available, which means you are not going to levy duties on the value addition that takes place in India or on the materials and components which are of Indian origin. Only on the imported items at the HS codes of their input, whatever taxes have been exempted, that alone should be charged, which will hopefully bring down the tariff costs and make it closer to the FTA regime countries. However, in my opinion, this is not going to be good enough, because what's going to still happen is while the import tariff from an SEZ in India is say 20% and an FTA regime is 5%, even if you bring it down using the mover principles, the 20 may come down to 8 or 9 or maybe 10. It's much better than 20, but still not good enough to be close to 5. So what we've been also trying to explain to the decision makers is that in Indian SEZs, if the value addition is on par with the value addition as prescribed in a free trade agreement, because typically any free trade agreement has around 35 to 40% local value content. Now, if an Indian SEZ is able to achieve that 35 or 40 or whatever threshold is deemed fit, if they are able to achieve that, then they should be able to get parity with the FTA regime countries. Because today we are really not competing with the factories in India. We are competing with factories located in similar zones outside the country. And as part of, multilateral free trade agreement, part of WTO, we really cannot have close our doors to our Indian markets to these overseas factories. We just have to make our own factories more efficient. We just have to make India a more efficient destination for these foreign invested factories to come and set up their manufacturing bases in India, because that's where we can really create these jobs. What we have really seen is, in fact, we had just a few days ago a meeting in Chennai with the top brass of the Commerce Ministry, and some interesting data came out of it, that the China-US trade war impacted $450 billion worth of trade both ways, which was impacted by the tariffs that were imposed by the US and countervailing sanctions by China. Now, where did all this business go? Out of all this business, India just got about 1.5% of this business, whereas Vietnam got some 14% and Thailand got 15%, and all the business went to everyone else, and we just got a minuscule share of this business. And as Mr. Alex Paul very rightly gave in his opening remarks, we've tied ourselves up in knots, which hopefully the DESH bill seeks to untangle and really get the Indian lion to roar to its full glory and get market share, because we do have the ability to do so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those points. I would now like to ask Arpita Mukherjee ma'am for her views on, first of all, the aspect of services SEZ area need not be contiguous, but the partial denotification of services SEZs is proposed to be allowed. So, and also the ambit of services has been extended to all, visibly all kinds of services which can be offered. How do you think this scheme can help the services sector? Because although IT has played a major role, we are also looking at diversification of services exports beyond IT. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Virat, and thank you everybody for being here. And it gives me an opportunity to listen to all the experts in this sector. Virat, we go back to the history. In India, STPI was phased out, and that time SEZ came. So the companies actually located in SEZ, primarily the IT companies, for getting the tax benefit. So that was the prime focus of companies to look at. Now, WTO, while it has a very strong discipline on goods, it does not have any discipline on subsidies in services. So, and with the increasing servicification of manufacturing, you can continue to give subsidies to services, and that is how the manufacturing sector benefits. So you can subsidize logistics, power, etc., etc. And many countries are actually moving towards zone on that. So the first aspect is that you have to smartly design your subsidy package through which your subsidy is not directly linked to manufacturing, but to the input used, the services as an input used into manufacturing. And for the services sector, you can actually design any or whatever subsidy. The problem of our SEZs was that while we had many services SEZ, single product, we also had many multi-product SEZ. And in the multi-product SEZ, it is very difficult to isolate subsidies given to A player or B player. So these are a couple of things which I want to bring to your notice. Now, coming back to the DESH bill, the point is like this, that the US challenged not only only this, it challenged the incentives under foreign trade policy, it challenged the electronic park. So many things and many subsidies that we do and give can be challenged, and we can lose the case, is something that we understood from the US action on the bill. Now, as we design our policies, there has two things: one, what the government should do, and one which the industry should also do. Very few of our industry actually is aware that it is very difficult to get a direct subsidy, and if they don't get a direct subsidy, they are not thrilled. You will hear them that I located this sector, that sector in SEZ, not because I think of anything else, but I think of the subsidy. So therefore the industry has to gradually get into the mode that direct subsidy will be challenged, and that is the thing that they need to think about. Whether it is production link, region specific, it can be an actionable. We are just moving out of a system of a prohibited subsidy to something like an actionable subsidy, because region specific subsidy is also an actionable subsidy. So it's not really a green signal, it is you're moving from a red area to something like a yellow light if you go by the traffic light. In this traffic light mode, you have to help the government to give you a policy which is more green. And that policy will be like Shashi pointed out, that what are the other non-fiscal benefits that you need. The common utilities that you can create, or many countries, even Philippines, can give you work permit and visas based on zones. So, this is endless. The third point is reverse job work. Reverse job work is sometimes needed because if you produce in an SEZ, suppose you produce a laptop, how are you going to service the laptop if it goes to the domestic area? So this service as a component of manufacturing has to be thought through by us. This is one core area. The other core area is, I strongly believe that we should not think of SEZ as a land area, because nowadays you have multi-storied factories and all the modern things are happening. Like if you go to Singapore, you will have like 20-storied factories. So, and they are much more efficient. India is a land scarce country. So, and if you have sectors like IT, you can really have a longitudinal building. So there will be some of these that can do away with. Now, the basic concept of Ministry of Finance has always been, see, the biggest problem of India is that India is a very high tariff country. When you have a very high tariff and you are importing a lot of raw material, the factories tend to locate and they argue for the low tariff, and that has been a developing country policy. And therefore, the SEZs become successful, because you have to make it zero import. Now, the problem is not only zero import, you need to actually also have a resilient supply chain where you can cater to both the domestic and the foreign market, and cater to, because if you invest in an infrastructure and you are actually facing seasonality or trade distortion or protectionism in foreign market, it impacts you adversely. So there is a general business smooth mobility that is needed. Much of it, the issue between firms in SEZ and DTA and vis-a-vis whether SEZ firms are getting some benefit or not, all of this crops from, nobody has been, courageous enough in India to actually map the immense amount of benefits that are given across the central government schemes, state government schemes. So one way of a success of a SEZ in any zones is to actually, one thing that we have been telling is the government is to prune down the number of incentives, subsidies, that you give to something which is more viable and manageable. And because all countries give something like for an industrial cluster, they may call it by different names, high technology zone, this zone, that zone, it is important to give it here. The other thing for services, because you use the word services, I think, services in India is we export two services. We export IT, ITS and business services. Today is the time where we have to look into the other champion sectors and see what we can export. Can we export health? Can we export education? Can we export tourism? And if we have to do that, we need to have very specialized policies catering to those areas and to supportive policies, and this need not be incentive, and therefore there has to be ease of mobility. When we go to Shanghai, we don't think Shanghai as an SEZ, right? We go to Shanghai, right? So like that, go to the financial hub in somewhere, it is a hub. So like that, the people should not feel that there is a physical barrier. And then only services SEZ will diversify out of IT into other sectors.
Interesting, ma'am, pretty interesting. To not have a physical barrier and ensure that people don't really think of it that way. It's a zone. So, Alex, sir, I would like to ask you, since you also mentioned that there was a lot of centralization in the scheme and in the SEZ scheme, and Arpita ma'am also mentioned that there could be a lot of incentives, too many to manage, difficult to even decipher at times. So now, if we increase involvement of states and DESH, how do you see it impacting the effectiveness and impact of the scheme? Sir, you're on mute.
So before joining the Ministry of Commerce and Industries, I was Labour Commissioner in the government of Chhattisgarh. So now I was on the other side of the fence, fighting for the cause of the labourers, and here I am in the Commerce Ministry fighting for the cause of the industry. And if you look at the number of state and central acts, only in the labour sector, we have around 45 state central acts in total. And if somebody is asked as to how many registers one has to maintain, forget the approvals. There are two parts, one is the approvals and the second part is the compliance. So in terms of compliance, if somebody has to maintain registers for the labor department alone, if you can make a guess as to number of registers one has to maintain, can you make a guess? Number of registers an industry has to maintain, above 100 industries, above 100 population has to maintain. 10, 15, 25? It is 94. So a labor inspector can actually walk into any industry and then catch hold of the entrepreneur and say, boss, you have not maintained register number 92. So how we are viewing compliances is because we have multiple laws. Each of the laws has its own rules, and we mandate that somebody has to maintain a certain set of information in a certain format, and either file them or keep them with us as registers and so on and so forth. So I'm only speaking about the labor sector of 45 state central laws to basically categorize. If I leave that, there are at least 30 plus more acts under which, like the Water Pollution Act, there's the Indian Stamp Act, there is the Electricity Act, there is a Foreign Development and Regulation Act, there is the Aircraft Act, there is a Companies Act. There's so many, all of them. How does an entrepreneur, cater to all of this? And part of it being central government, and part of them being state government, and part of them being, authorities which have been like for example, in the case of the pollution control, we have authorities to govern that. So how does an industry thrive or survive in such a scenario? Is by only having a decentralized, accountability structure, and also by having a single window system for all of the approvals as well as for the compliances. So most of the times what has happened till now in India is that we have all fought for single window system for approvals, and I used to funnily say this, you go to a department and they'll say they have a single window. The moment you open one single window, you at least have 5 or 6 another single windows inside the single window. There are multiple single windows inside every single window. So whereas we are speaking about a real single window, which can actually function in such a fashion that does not hamper the existing authority, where it all comes, where the collection of information all happens in one single form, or two forms rather, one for approvals and one for compliances. And each of the information gets divided and it goes through an API to the concerned department for their approvals. And we have a system of deemed approvals within a timeline. And I think the SEZ Act, a new act, is actually going to have this provision of having provisional agreement. If somebody applies and it's not happening within 90 days. And we also introduced a concept called the partnering government agencies. And by definition, a partnering government agency may be a state government authority, maybe a public sector, maybe an authority constituted under a certain law which is independent, maybe the central agencies, or so on and so forth. Anybody who's involved, in the management of the industry will have to become a PGA, a partner government agency, and will be subjected to whomsoever volunteers to be part of the SEZ. They will be subjected to a provisional approval in a time span of 90 days. I mean, they'll still have another 90 days window or 180 days windows to contest the provisional approval and pull back the approvals. And if not, that becomes deemed approval. So we're moving forward towards such a regime when it comes to approvals. But I think the wish list of the industry shouldn't stop there. The wish list of the industry should move towards a single window system for compliances also, where so many times what happens, the industry is also afraid to see that, that kind of data to be provided. And most of the times what happens, the BI tools in any software will be able to automatically check if the industry is compliant to, all the rules and regulations or not. For example, there is a particular labor law, and you need to maintain, let me say, payment of bonus act is a particular act. If you're paying bonuses or not, in this bigger industries, medium scale industries do not really, eat into the wages and the perks of laborers and survive out of that. They offer whatever is by rule, and they don't want harassment. So when the complaints regime also gets into a single window, where you all have to find one single annual return to all the departments put together, labor, industries, MSME, pollution control, so on and so forth, I think life becomes very simple. And because it is humanly impossible to basically make the, let me say that, because there is one school of thought where they say that the development commissioner of the SEZ should be a Superman, where he has all the powers of labor, industry, pollution control, everything, and he sits and adjudicates on every law that is applicable on it. It's humanly impossible to create that kind of capability, human resources into one single authority to do all of this. So rather than dependent upon people, we should be dependent upon a system, a single window system, and a computerized ecosystem with a provisional and a deemed approval scenario, which takes care of all our approvals as well as our compliances. So that will reduce the load from the central government, and the central government should also in turn think of decentralizing those powers of the central government, which it actually holds under all of these 30 plus acts which it has, to the regional authorities, either to the state government head authority as it is conceived in the new act, where we have proposed a state authority where the state will have a larger role in terms of approving all of this, with also a very keen role being played by the development commissioner's office, the zonal development commissioner's office, playing a great role in that. So I think all of these reforms, when we write the rules and we also create this, we kind of code the single window system, is only going to basically create the way forward for our industry. Otherwise, we are going to held up with this eternal red tapeism and paperwork if we don't have a proper, a single window system with an ecosystem where everybody, is actually connected through wire, and there is a faceless, paperless, approval compliance monitoring system where we rely more on the business intelligence tools and not on human intelligence and human intervention into, managing the affairs of industry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for clarifying on that. Sunil, Rallan, sir, I would like to ask you for the manufacturing aspect, because so far, as you know, SEZ has not been as successful in boosting manufacturing, and at present, India is looking to scale up its manufacturing share, ensure greater end-to-end value chain integration, more share in global value chains, attract investments, and we are looking at a lot of these futuristic sectors like electronics, electric vehicles, solar. Defense is something which is a major focus area for the government, even if not for export, but for self-reliance as well. So how can DESH play a role in this regard?
Thank you very much, Virat. Okay, now coming back to services, one interesting concept that is being brought about in the DESH bill is the principle of manufacturing services. Now, manufacturing services is essentially a very important service. All the major contract manufacturers that you would know of, whether it is Foxconn or whether it is Windstrom or many of these large factories, are all contract manufacturers for the global brands like Apple and so on and so forth. Now, this is a very important aspect which we don't seem to recognize here in India, And the reason we are bringing this manufacturing services is because we see a huge potential and growth in the manufacturing sector. And the principle of manufacturing services will enable the government decide based on its priorities, its budgets, and its agenda to decide which industries we need to support, where we want to achieve pole position. For example, I'm reading a report that when laptops and computer systems, the market size was 300 billion, and with mobile phones, the market was 600 billion, and now with EVs, the market size is close to 1.6 trillion. So that is the scale of markets that we're looking at, especially the new generation markets that are looking to come into India, like the EV market. And smart subsidies can now be designed very efficiently, based on government's priorities and government's budgets. And these will all be WTO compliant, as my friend Professor Arpita was mentioning earlier. The other thing in the manufacturing services or manufacturing sector that is being addressed is to provide for approvals for setting up dormitories, skill development centers, cafeterias, and other common facilities for exclusive use by these manufacturing companies to be set up in the processing area itself, so that they'll be eligible for their fiscal concessions. And they will not be used, it will not be treated as a non-processing or as a DTA area where access to non-SEZ or non-units is not going to be available. So the usage is going to be, now all these things address the issue that is just raised earlier by Mr. Sashi, that I can't have 500 buses running on the highway to move people into the factory. This will get addressed once dormitories are permitted to be set up in campus for the workers themselves. The other thing that we are looking to achieve in the new DESH bill is to have a negative list of authorized operations. Instead of saying what business you can be allowed to do, because what can be allowed to be done, the list can be infinite, and this list is very dynamic because many new technologies that will come up in 3 to 5 years, we don't even know about them today. So how can we say whether we will allow them or not allow them today? So what we're looking to get is a negative list of A, B, and C, which will not be allowed because that's not in national interest or that's not national priority and not in the part of the national agenda. But anything not in the negative list will be a permissible economic activity. So this will mean that monitoring will happen, but units, developers, co-developers will not have the need to keep going back and forth for various approvals each time the business undergoes a change or a requirement. The same thing is being sought for the services. Units are eligible for goods and for services, to procure goods and services for their manufacturing or their service units. Now, each time they need to go for their approvals. So what we are recommending, and I think we can see that, there will be a negative list of A, B, and C will not be permissible for any concessions, and anything not in this list will be a default permission that will be given. Now this, as Mr. Alex Paul has mentioned earlier, will enhance the efficiency of the approval mechanism, because most of it will now be in the form of monitoring and in the form of ensuring compliance, so that the units can focus more on their business models and ramping up their business economic activities. What we are also hopeful to see in the DESH bill is more efficient refund of any embedded taxes, whether it is through the ROTTEP scheme or through other such schemes. Today the scheme is called as ROTTEP. 5 years later it may be called by some other acronym. But the principles are being sought to be established fairly and clearly, that any embedded taxes which are there need to be refunded efficiently, so that these taxes are not going to be exported. So these are some of the things that the new DESH bill is going to really, give a lot of emphasis on supporting manufacturing as a sector and as a whole.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Arpita ma'am, I would like to ask you also, how can DESH be a catalyst for promoting R&D? Because that is one of the critical ways in which we can be globally competitive and even lead in products, which in the past hasn't been much of a case. But India to be an innovation leader, how can DESH help in that regard?
See, in most countries, like if you look at China or many of the ASEAN countries and Korea, they use their SEZ to actually promote high technology, R&D and investment. Countries differ into how they actually use their SEZs to promote that. And mostly it is, fast track patenting, R&D centers, allowing, like I said, in Philippines, they allow, in some countries, they allow easier visa for foreigners to come and work. In some countries, they they reduce the timelines, they handhold the people, they do quality capacity building. So they provide a lot of what you call a value added service, which encourages companies to innovate. We have a lot of startups, but our startups may be so busy growing their farms, getting their capital, that they don't really go in for patenting and all these activities. And in many countries, these are connected to the industry so that they commercialize their businesses, and they go for patenting and product, taking a hold on their product. So these are many thoughts that has happened. When we wrote our book, we actually gave a lot of examples of how our countries are using these services into the SEZ, and they are creating center of excellence within SEZ. Like, for example, we have a lot of industries like gems and jewelry in SEZ, but gems and jewelry today can be very high technology industry. So you can bring in those high technology capacity building centers. You can create centers of excellence within the SEZ. So the scheme offers all of this, and their possibility to set up is immense, and possibility to jointly use the facility, like they talked about quality assurance. All these facilities can be like certification bodies. These can be jointly used if they have a presence in the SEZ. One of the problems that Indian SEZ faced when we were discussing this years ago was that we have too many of them. And too many SEZs, and many of the SEZs, why they are not operational? They don't have a single unit. Now, until the SEZ reaches a scale, other countries like China and many of these countries, they start off with 5 to 6 SEZ at a time. They build the scale. If you look at a plan, so once they achieve the scale, then it is useful for setting up the common user facility. So sometimes the government has the problem that should I put the common user facility, but there is no scale. Like for each SEZ, if I put in a custom officer and the number of clearance officers, and then there is 2 units, there is a underutilization of resources. So the common user facilities will work when the SEZ scales up, and therefore it is very important that we look into few SEZs and enable them to scale up, and then once the scale up, grow in size, the common user facility. Also, common user facilities require a size. So that is again another thing that we need to think about. While I completely agree that in case of India, large acres of land is a problem, and in a country where you have the northeast hilly and some places you don't have land, you just first block the land and then wait for a unit to come in is absolutely non-viable proposition. While it didn't work out. So how do you put a user facility under one roof? And that is something we need to really see. And now many countries are doing that. Like in a common building, you enter the building, from hand-holding of the startups to taking them through the patenting process is happening under one roof.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you so much for the esteemed panelists for sharing their views during the session. I would just like to see if we have some audience questions, but meanwhile, I would like to ask the panel also, when we are talking about SEZ, the first thing that comes to my mind is, specialization within a certain geographical area. Let's say, an automobile value chain or an EV value chain, where every, supplier, which is a part of that value chain, is in a closely knit proximity to each other. So it's like maybe not a physical zone, but it's like a virtually, a close-knit area where everybody is collaborating, is close to each other. So is that something which we can hope to expect, more specialized zones catering to specific products?
I think that will automatically happen, while in principle, all the zones currently are multi-sector, but then markets will play a major role in determining where the units are, what type of units are going to come up in which of these zones. And accordingly, the supply chains will want to be relocated in close proximity. And that's a business model that will naturally and organically evolve. So what I also see going forward is the mover scheme, as you are aware of, is quite similar to the SEZ scheme. And in this mover scheme, there is no limitation of size and scale. They can be standalone units, whereas in SEZ is more of a cluster approach. So both these schemes are actually going to run concurrently and parallelly, where you will have some of these units who are probably set up under the mover scheme and plugged into customers or factories which are located in these hubs, and both will sort of feed off each other depending on geographical advantage, which will decide on logistics, shipping, etc.
Yeah.
May I add to this? Virat, may I add to this?
Yes, ma'am.
That countries do have multiple formats. So if you look at countries, they will have financial hubs, they will have free trade zones, they will have electronics parks. So, having multiple format is not a problem. But as long as you design your format smartly to make it WTO compliant, it is good. Sometimes you can look at a value chain approach as well. There are, when you are doing it from textile to apparel, you are actually looking at the entire value chain, from button making to zip to coloring dyes. So you can actually have a value chain approach for these zones. So all of this is possible, but there is also another questions on why can't we engage with Services Export Promotion Council for this services hub? This is again very important, because in India today you have this fragmented a number of export promotion councils. Sometimes they don't work together. And if they work together, the requirement of the zones can be better layout, and they can be the engines to market our zone in foreign country. That is one part which I saw, that, abroad they market, like Dubai, they will market it so well. We have many good things, but we don't market it that well. Secondly, sometimes these zones kind of a concept also gets a international viability when we have some strategy. I'm giving you the example of Taiwan and all these ASEAN countries. They actually have a services export strategy. Export strategy is laid down like, I have for free trade warehousing zones, I'm creating logistics hubs. So that is a marketing tool. If we have those kind of marketing tools, they lay down the basis for our. What is happening is, this is a very good bill which the Indians understand, and they know that this bill is WTO compliant. But this bill has a global recognition to get our units into the thing. So while we are thinking about the SEZ thing, this is a good time that we design a package like Dubai did for Jebel Ali, or Gabon calling, not necessarily mean that's the best place to be there, but the way they marketed it is very important. And therefore, we need to also think about how we market India. And how we market that, in India, we are offering, pockets of excellence with the terms of ease of doing business.
Right. Thank you, ma'am, for addressing that question. There are some questions regarding the bill itself and how it is progressing. I don't think that's a question for the panel. There is one query that, in the past several regimes, it's Mr. Vikram Bapat, in the past several regimes ran parallel and at cross purposes, example, SEZ clashing with industrial clusters or STPI. Will DESH eliminate these multiple regimes? So anybody would like to address that?
I don't think DESH seeks to, substitute any of the other schemes, because STPI, Electronic Park Scheme, and the various biotechnology park schemes, these are all schemes which are being designed under the foreign trade policy. So these schemes will continue. And we at this point of time, because the foreign trade policy itself, which is an expired document and has been kept, on an extension process. So we'll have to wait and see when the new foreign trade policy is rolled out as to what schemes are going to continue to exist and what will be perishing.
Right. So I'm just looking at if any. Sir, Alex, sir, would you like to add something? Because you were going to
yeah, I just wanted to add something here. See, what's happening is currently there are 3 points basically. One is this the impediments. One is the net foreign exchange NFE positive clause, and the second one is for this free movement to and from DTA. Second part. And the third is the contiguity clauses. These 3 are the major impediments when you look at how people looking at. The moment you actually tackle these 3, every zone becomes an absolutely free zone. So I think we are looking at an influx of existing units coming and asking SEZ status, and not the other way around. I just wanted to add as an addendum as to what Sunil added.
Right. Yeah. Right, sir. I think there are no open. Yeah, Mr. Gendham, you want to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Virat, just wanted to add or re-emphasize one of the points which Mr. Sunil mentioned about the manufacturing as a service itself. It is so true. Currently, most of the shifts that's happening from China to India, so these parts of products have already been designed and they've been in production there for a long time. When those supply chains are moving here, more or less, components are almost 100% imported. And that will continue at least for the next 2 to 3 years, while we work on localizing and all of that. See, until that period of 2-3 years, when we find local vendors, qualify them, this activity that we do here in either SEZ or DTA or MORW scheme will just actually be a service only until then. So, therefore, it's extremely important that our DESH will take this into account very, very prominently. To address manufacturing as a service. It's not just software as a service, but I think manufacturing as a service too.
It has been provisioned, to answer to your question. It has been provisioned.
Yeah. Great, sir. I'm just reemphasizing it's such a great importance to have that. Yeah.
It is there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. I think there are no other open questions. The floor is open for any closing remarks by any of our panelists. Anything you would like to add or say on a closing note?
I'd just like to close up by saying that, we are all hopeful that the DESH bill will see the light of day in the winter session, hopefully. But once this happens, the growth in the manufacturing sector that we can look forward to seeing is no more linear, but it's going to be an exponential growth. The growth in terms of exports and our numbers that we're looking at, like 5, 7, 8, 10% growth rates are going to be proven completely wrong, because our growth rates were going to be upwards of 20, 25%. That's the kind of, the Nancy Pelosi visit a few days ago has made all the difference. I mean, you have really, I wish I could explain myself more clearer and how I feel about it. This has made such a huge difference into the investment move amongst these relocating supply chains, looking for a safe haven. I can use this word now safely, calling a safe haven for manufacturing, to bring in technology, to bring in capital, and to bring in their production and order books to set up manufacturing in India, because these countries are looking for a safe haven. And that's why I say, everybody says that India is like what I said earlier, last frontier. They're looking at it as the last paradise. We are the last paradise. I hope we don't become the lost paradise. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Virat, the point is like this, that every time SEZ bill is discussed, there will be always a tension from the finance ministry about the loss in revenue. It's simply because many a times those in SEZs are not able to actually showcase how much revenue they are contributing. You know, you are generating employment, you are making investment, you are actually making revenue also. The revenue loss is very insignificant from the revenue gains that actually happen. And my only worry is that, you know, sometimes the net foreign exchange earning was an indicator to argue the benefits that they are bringing to the country. Now, when this indicator goes, and IT companies actually used it very much because their net foreign exchange earning is much higher than maybe a petroleum or gems and jewelry sector located in the SEZ. They also had a quick net foreign exchange. My only request to the industry will be, think of an indicator that helps the Ministry of Commerce to convince the Ministry of Finance that this bill is going to be beneficial, you know, with certain numbers and indicators. Like Shashi was talking, like I can create 25,000 jobs. Like this is a great number to actually showcase, because if you create quality employment, that's a economic activity in the nation. And I think then this bill will see the, you know, really move forward. Otherwise we will just stick to the point of the entire benefit being only whether a subsidy is given or not, and we need to move our discussion beyond a subsidy.
Right.
Fully agree, ma'am. Subsidy is short term, and then, you know, it's like ecosystem is the long term. So yeah.
I think what I just want to, you know, convey through this forum, if I can, to the Department of Revenue, that in India, if we want something we never had, I think it's time we did something we never did. Because this is now the time, this is now we're at a sweet spot. We've now got to grab it with both hands. We've got to be able to attract these investments. As Professor Arpita just mentioned, jobs as an indicator. I have personally been talking to just a few units, and they're already talking numbers which is in excess of 100,000 jobs right away in the area of Chennai, or in the Chennai region in Tamil Nadu. And this is just the beginning. I mean, this is not even the tip of the iceberg. That's why, you know, the numbers which are being talked about in terms of investments, in terms of job creation, in terms of growth, export markets will start to come in, but nobody wants to be caught in a web. They want to have a free process of, you know, being able to do their business according to the global economic dynamics, where they can export, they can cater to domestic tariff areas seamlessly. The numbers of growth are absolutely, you know, humongous. I mean, it's beyond my ability to even put anything down. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, everybody. Alex, sir, Sunil, sir, Sasikumar, sir, Arpita, ma'am, for taking time to share your invaluable views with us. I'm afraid we are out of time, though there are a lot of hands being raised. Please address your questions to us through email. We'll definitely try and reach out to the panelists to answer them. And with that, I thank you all once again for an excellent session. And with this, I bring this session to the close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.